The Society for Culture and Environment extends a warm welcome. You are watching a session on Jangar Singh Sham, a conjurer's archive. Jyotindra Jain in conversation with Annapurna Garimella from the Bhopal Literature and Art Festival, January 2019. Sri Jyotindra Jain is an Indian art and cultural historian and museologist. A scholar on folk and ritual arts of India, he was the director of the National Crafts Museum, New Delhi, member secretary and professor at Indira Gandhi National Centre for the Arts. Ms. Annapurna Garimella is a Delhi based designer and an art historian. Her research focuses on late medieval Indic architecture and the history and practices of vernacular art forms in India after independence.
Good morning, everybody. Uh, I'm going to speak about the life and work of Jangar Singh Sham, a Pradhan artist from Madhya Pradesh. He was an extraordinary artist that you know, and those who are from Bhopal, they don't even need any introduction to Jangar. But then I have certain standpoints from which I have looked at Jangar, and maybe some of these are needed to be articulated in order to have a different understanding of Jangar than it was often here in Bharat Bhavan and in many places and anywhere in the world. Much has been written about Jangar, and I still thought that there was something that I wanted to say, and therefore I, over the last 10 years, I've been working on Jangar Singh Sham. I've known him personally very well, and as a result of that, and having spent much time with him, particularly when I was curating an exhibition called Other Masters, and the Jangar was one of the 5, and he stayed 1 month in Crafts Museum, which I used to run in Delhi. I had lots and lots of conversations with him that time, and then when he was commissioned to do very huge murals here in Bhopal, in the Madhya Pradesh State Assembly building. Those who are from outside and not seen those murals, I would say before you go, do go and see those murals, though permissions are required and perhaps the organizers can do that, but it would be quite an experience for anyone who has not seen those murals in Bhopal to go and see them. I was working on this book, I'd seen a few publications, and particularly I was triggered to write this book because he is, as you can see, that while trying to finish a large commission at a museum in Japan, very small town in Japan, in Niigata, where he stayed for 3 months, and when after 3 months when he was to return, for some reason or the other, the Japanese side, the museum extended his stay, and they have written to me that the museum's policy was that artists come in residence, they create works, and then some of the works were sold in the market and some were retained for their own museum. After he finished his 3-year tenure, he wanted to come back, but somehow they extended his work and his stay, and they asked him to do more works, and he was not able to finish. That's what I gather from the 2 letters that he wrote to his wife, who is here today. And these 2 letters I had access to, which are extremely revealing. And the book that I have published on Jangar, in that for the first time ever, I have published both letters in his own handwriting, and then also I have published them in translation, sitting with Baju, because he knows the language and things, and he came to Delhi and we translated and published. So there was some controversy whether Jangar really died of some other reason or because he was held up over, So I wanted to clarify the situation, and that's why literal translations, etc. I published my book. The book is, this is the book that has come out. It is published by Mapping Publishing, and I think in 3-4 days it should be in the market everywhere. So Now, because of time shortage, etc., let me go directly because we'll also have a discussion with Annapurna Garimella. I'm very honored that Annapurna has agreed because she's one person who has been looking into things rather than looking at things, and therefore, particularly, she has done pioneering work in the idea of the contemporary in the vernacular. And the word vernacular we have to always use in inverted commas till when we find a better term. So before any sound critical framework could be evolved around the phenomenal artist Jangar Singh Sham, callous market forces came to dominate his art, and Jangar himself became their first casualty. While trying to finish a large commission at a museum in Japan under adverse circumstances, and these circumstances, what were adverse, I will tell you at the end, circumstances, Jangar committed suicide in 2001. He was 40 then. Now, I can change from here also, no? So next, can I go? Can I change from here? Or have to use that one? ये तो है, इससे नहीं होगा। अभी टाइप हो गया। Okay, fine. ठीक। So, I start with this sentence. Jangar's muse was molded at Bharat Bhavan, this very place. I'm sure when he was here, he must have been moving around in all these spaces and things, and we obviously miss his presence here. But his muse was molded in Bharat Bhavan, and this is very significant because what is the importance of my saying this, that his muse was molded in Bharat Bhavan? Because if you compare with any other folk or tribal artists of India, they came from a certain tradition of painting, whereas Jangar came from almost very little tradition of painting and has almost no relationship to what he did and what the tradition was of clay relief work, etc. in their houses. If you compare, you don't see any connection. For example, if you see Jivya Somamashi, a very renowned tribal artist from Maharashtra, or if you see Ganga Devi's work from Madhubani, you see that even though both artists stepped out of their inherited tradition and stepped out into a space which is very interesting space, they made the space for themselves, and that's the space from where they spoke. So creating that space and to speak from that space is still a case of coming out of a certain tradition. Whereas in Jangar's case, they had little bit of a tradition of clay relief work, etc. But his work, so therefore what he did has happened here. Whereas when Jangar, where other folk and tribal artists did, it happened outside their village space, but it also, they carried that into, and a new space was created. So when I say Jangar muse was molded in Bharat Bhavan, it's a very loaded thing, that a modernist art institution where he arrived as a teenager on artist J. Swaminathan's prompting. So Swaminathan was, I don't want to go into because there won't be enough time, and most of you who live here, they know that when this institution was to be built, it was decided that there would be also a gallery of folk and tribal arts of Madhya Pradesh. And that's how teams of young boys and girls from art school is very important because they went with some kind of agenda to collect folk art and identify artists, etc. So through that exercise, Jangar was also found. It's a myth to say that Jangar had done so many paintings all over in his village. It's not true. I want to see one visual of that. Well, I'm saying that you know, there, yes, of course, he did some kind of drawing here and there or some little bit of thing, but there is no evidence of visual I've ever seen that. Yeah, so he was doing little bit of drawing, little bit of work, but it was not that like Madhubani artist. He wasn't already a kind of artist who was doing elaborate work. Here, while responding to new mediations, when he came here, he didn't come with a great tradition with him, like Madhubani or Wali. So when he responding to new mediations, bright pigments, ink pens, white paper, printmaking in conjunction with the creative environment of the place, he brilliantly transformed the world of things and legends into world of images. So he came with what? He came with the forest life and the legends which were around, and they were in his mind. But he didn't come with a whole bulk of things or from a tradition, so which was a very rich tradition of painting. It wasn't, So this is one I wanted to clarify this. So brilliantly transformed the world of things and legends into a world of images. So he came with the what he had seen and what he had heard. So from oral to visual, there were transformations that happened in his work. And how these transformations happened, meaning he was a master of image making. He made from anything that he inherited, whatever his memory, nostalgia of his village, he just came empty-handed. But he came with those things, and he made images. He transformed the world into a world of images, and that's the space. That is the space that he created, and that's the space from where he spoke. So, yeah. Now, I want to, as I said, a little bit of his life and work, both I'm looking at. I'm showing these two visual to you, and I want to tell two stories about this. One is that you see the picture on your left side, the black and white picture. This is a photograph that was taken when I was curating an exhibition called Other Masters, and Jankar was one of the 5. And I used the word master. Some people have misunderstood that I was not trying to create masters out of any personal thing, but I used it a bit sarcastically, because there are Pahari masters and there are modern masters and things like that. So a little bit sarcastically I have used the term other masters. Now Jankar was to be one of the 5, and I was publishing a catalogue that time. So the catalogue was in the making, and I called for Jankar, who was staying in Crafts Museum that time, where the exhibition was to take place. So I asked Jankar, I sent for Jankar and I said, call him, I want him to get a photograph for the book. So he came my room, and I said, Jankar, outside the photograph is waiting, go and get yourself photographed. So he said, sir, shall I shed my clothes? In Hindi he said, Saab kapde khol do. So I was amazed when I asked him to get himself photographed, and he said, so I said, why are you saying this? So he said that no, there was a gallery in Delhi, and when they did an exhibition, this is a very important point I'm making, both regarding his art and our looking at tribal authenticity. So he said that no, there was a gallery in Delhi who were doing his exhibition, and they said that if you look, because Jankar he grew up in Bhopal, he was urban like Baju by everybody. He was wearing jeans and a shirt, and he was living his life the way he would after coming here. So the gallery told him that no, if you look like urban artist and if you wear jeans and things, then there won't be authenticity about your work. So can you imagine that there can be something like that happening in an art gallery based in Delhi, that they would still want to push an artist for his authentic. So you don't have your authenticity if you come to the city and you dress up. You don't have a right to go into another space, or So to critique this, I have these 2 lines. One is James Clifford, who is a very, very famous American anthropologist, who wrote a fantastic book called The Predicament of Culture, where he just critiqued the whole idea in the entire book, a whole idea of tribal contemporaneity and thing. So there's a sentence in his book, because the tribal artist's authenticity exists just prior to the present. He can never be in the present. His identity, his authenticity is somewhere there. And this we never got rid of, despite the fact that last 20 years, at least all over the world, we are trying, particularly in Australia, Aboriginal art and things, the way it is being brought together, that we did not manage. So, secondly, this Sally Price, who is very well known, she wrote a book called primitive art in civilized places. And there she says, if the artist isn't anonymous, then the art isn't primitive or authentic. Tribal artist has to be anonymous, sort of. He can't be individual. So these are some of the issues here. I can't take that much time, but I have in my book at length I've dealt with this issue. It's a very important issue because it's an issue of vernacularization of an artist. So the left side is the artist, the right side is vernacularized. So what is the real personality? Sorry. Now, in Bharat Bhavan, when Jangar came to that Bharat Bhavan where there was a very big discourse about art versus ethnography, because it's so easy to connect ethnography with Aboriginal art or tribal art and things. So I'm reading out two quotes of Swaminathan, who was responsible in getting Jangar over here. He was responsible in doing that component in Rupankar. And these are two quotes I've taken from Mark Tully's famous book called No Full Stops in India. And Mark had traveled many years ago with Jangar to his village. And this is perhaps one of the very rare documents where Jangar's own quotes are there. Because nearly 35 hours of driving from here, and the ambassador car would constantly break down. There's a parallel story of the ambassador car along with Jangar's own life as they journeyed together. So here it says, he says, Swami said, we are running an art exhibition, not an exercise in ethnography or anthropology. So separation of anthropological or cultural content from art, and therefore the desire to go to pure art as if that exists and that can be separated. Very modernist approach, highly modernist, formalist approach to them. Second quote is, Mark Tully told Swaminathan that, Mark Tully is a big, very famous BBC journalist who was posted in India for many years. He still lives there. So there was some discussion, and Mark told Swami that in Shimla, in the Institute of Advanced Studies, there is a conference, and that conference is about anthropologists were having conference. So Swami said that the stupid fools don't know what effect Picasso's discovery on tribal art had on Europe. And this is the core of discussion with regard to how tribal art is supposed to be kind of supposed to be elevating modernist art. So Picasso, if Picasso took inspiration from African sculpture, the African sculptures become important only in the context of Picasso and because of Picasso, but otherwise by itself not. So when a major exhibition that took place in the Museum of Modern Art, there I think James Clifford had offered this critique. At Museum of Modern Art, treating tribal objects as art means excluding the original cultural context. So there, he says that right at the entrance to the exhibition, it was said that we should not connect the two things, only appreciate the formal value of an object of art. This was an old debate, and I think the best critic was James Clifford, who did that, and after that I think, and despite that, I think we still talk about this kind of. So what was good enough for Picasso is good enough for Museum of Modern Art. So when the exhibition was dismantled, the Picasso objects went to Modern Art Museum, and again they had very formalist caption. But the African masks, which went back to Anthropological Museum, they had again all the ritual value, this, etc. in the caption there would be. I just want to take a bit broader issue. I mentioned to you Jivya Sumamashi, how do you step into your another contemporary space? Tradition is not something frozen in the past, but passes through evolving context and conflict and change. You know, we must know that people go through conflict. What happened in Bastar? Look at the history of Bastar, the revolt, shooting, killing, both in colonial times and afterward. You think that doesn't get ever reflected? That's not in the mind of the people? Must it not come in their art? Must always it come, should it come only through rituals and things? So what is contemporaneity? So, for example, on your left side there is this painting by Jivya Somamashe. Now, this was a painting that Jivya created for the exhibition Other Masters, and he was given a very large space, 8 feet by 8 feet board, and on that board he said, you mind in a sense, I didn't tell him what to do, but he said, I want to do something of my memory. And Jivya had a big market in Bombay eventually, and the Gallery Camol had given him some kind of 30, they recorded 30 stories of Jivya Soma's own village, and then told him whether he would like to illustrate them. It was very interesting because they were verbal. So transformation of the verbal into visual, what did he do? Creating this whole storm of images and things. So this one he did, Jivya did by, I'm talking about contemporaneity. It comes to applies to all of them who I'm showing. So here he had a memory, in his village had a memory that many years, several generations before, how railway line train came from Bombay to Delhi or Bombay to Baroda or going toward Delhi. So when the railway line comes, it goes straight, cutting directly, the village into two. It doesn't go meanderingly. It has no consideration of houses, people, fields, rivulet, or etc. So when the railway line came, in the village there is a memory, and this he also heard about. And then he did. This is a detail of a larger painting he did. That when the railway line came, half of the village was on that side, half was this side. Some of the fields were here, the rivulet was that side, and partly it came this side. So this kind of ruthless division that took place of the village, that was in the memory of their village. And then Jivya did it. It was an eye-opener for me, because until then it was here in his mind. But then there was a chance to bring that, and that is how you step into a contemporary space. On top right, there you see there is it's a detail from a Santhal storyteller's scroll, Santhal tribe. And there you see the first couple, which you see in the lower register inside a house, inside a hut. And that Mahadev, the story is that Mahadev visits the first couple. Now formerly Mahadev visited the first couple with his ganas or something, but then when they saw that ministers are being always accompanied by policemen or guards, so now Mahadev also needed, so bullet belt wearing guards are accompanying Mahadev to the first couple, and in the lower register you can see the guns and things like that. Now this is their contemporary social, political and personal predicament, and from that things come. So when they step into that space, so that authentic space, once you can leave, when it becomes through the market and museum that you can leave that so-called authentic space, your space opens up, and that is how. And lower part there is this Madhubani artist Ganga Devi. She had done a whole series of 4 paintings when she got cancer, and this is one of the 4 from her cancer series. So what I'm saying is that how they step into things, they pass through evolving context of their life. How can it be that we can go to hospital, we do everything, and others, they can't depict there, So this opening up, some artists might be great and others might be a little less imaginative, but still the opening up of the space and stepping into the contemporary is very interesting. Now, Jankar, when he came to Bharat Bhavan, he initially did images of gods, kind of single image paintings he did, largely. Also a couple of birds and things, but very single. There wasn't much of narrative, there wasn't much of, except that he's God. But interesting is that very rarely and very few of his gods were actually depicted in his village also visually. So later on, so Jangar, when he came here, he encountered paper, color, etc. And then he began to do his, he began to bring gods to life. So for early work of Jangar is related. So Swaminathan had once said, and very beautifully, the deities become real by the truth of imagination. So Jangar was all about imagination, image making, visual image making. And once Jangar told to Mark Tully, because these gods were not represented like that in the village. So when he brought them, and I also call it a kind of secularization process, because with the coming of paper, when gods began to be shown, they were not meant for worship, but they were images, and therefore paper and these kind of images, even if they were religious, it was a secularization process in the sense it was a whole thing of image making. But then I used to see, Jangar said to Mark, but then I used to see people, when the gods took possession of them, and that's how I got the idea of what the gods looked like. So when a shaman, a deity enters the shaman in spirit possession, etc., then you see the shaman, then he's not that human being shaman, but he's possessed by the god. And often in mostly those who have worked in anthropological context, they'll find that even a man, when he's possessed by a goddess, he will talk as if he is woman. So the whole grammar would be the expression of grammar of he speaking, woman speaking. So, this is how he visualizes gods. When he came here, you've been moving around these domes of this building. This building has been designed by Charles Correa, a very renowned architect. And so the domes, right in the beginning, when Jangar had perhaps not yet come here, or he was coming, attending some camps and going back, or maybe he had just settled down, but very early part of 1980s, he was painting. And on the right side, you see Jangar seated there after painting. This is my most favorite image, because he's shown there almost like a laborer, an artist who has worked physically on the thing, and there isn't that air about an artist image. He's just absolutely naturally sitting there and just tired or just looking at his own work. It's a fantastic image. In the exhibition that I did in Delhi, this was a very large enlargement that I put at the entrance. This is a painting which is never published before, and I think it is a self-portrait. But Jangar's own life, as we have heard from various people, has some kind of parallel to the legend of Krishna. So Jangar was an excellent flute player. He used to say, and those who know Baju and all, they know that Jangar was a flute player. He used to take his cows perhaps to the next village, and there, when the cows were grazing, he would play flute. And one of the most favorite creatures of Jangar, both in his painting and otherwise, was a snake or a cobra. So a snake or cobra has come to listen. Now one can say that, and all the cows come rushing to him as he's playing his flute. The thing is that this has such a great similarity to the legend of Krishna, and I suppose Jangar's wife to be in future also was perhaps drawn to his flute, or at least came to see him, and later on I suppose he eloped with her. So I am not saying it's a self-portrait, but look at the body is not blue. Jangar has done Krishna figures, but those are blue, and here it's not blue. So I feel that, and therefore I don't want to sort of categorically say something, but say it's a self-portrait or allegory of Krishna. There's no contradiction in this. These are two paintings. Now as I run through some of his work, these are some work which many people may not have seen in Bhopal, because what Bharat Bhavan has are mostly his early works. But his later works, at least 150 paintings that I have seen, they're all outside Bharat Bhavan, and I think most people didn't have any chance to see them. They are in private collection, they've been changing hands within private collection collectors. So this is like Sheshanaga holding the earth on his head. And the early iconography, if you go to Vidisha, for example, where Bhudevi or the earth, there she's shown as a young girl. After the 17th century in Mughal painting and things, you see the earth as globe. And mostly later on, people have shown the earth as globe. Sheshanaga, the serpent, is supposed to be holding the earth on his head. But here, I like these two paintings immensely because the earth for a person who comes from kind of forest background, and that's his entire life and livelihood and everything related to that, he has conceptualized the earth in terms of forest or trees, and that's earth, that's the earth, that's the area he knows, and that's the earth for him literally as well as conceptually the whole earth or universe. So that is like very extremely beautifully thought of as a kind of conceptualizing the earth in terms of nature and clay and earth. And then Jangad himself called himself always a Shaivite, so often he put this trident, he put a trident over here in most of his painting where he showed snakes. This is my favorite painting, and I tell you why. And it will clarify a few. I think the light is because here particularly. Can you see all the textures from there?
बीच वाले लाइट को बंद कर सकते हैं जो स्क्रीन के तरफ है. ये स्क्रीन का बंद है.
Anyway, so this is my favorite painting, and I tell you why, and I'm raising an issue about it. That many people think that what Jangad did in terms of textures and dots and dotting, all sorts of patterning and things like that, many people took it as kind of beautiful decoration or as if it's decorative or something like that. But it's not so. If you think of the way, if you have seen a lizard from close, you always find that the lizard's skin is transparent or translucent, and you can see inside the skin. So the way the blood flows, the plasma, the heaving and breathing movement, etc. And I feel that Jangad has throughout in all his work used these textures to indicate some characteristic of the figure that he is drawing. And therefore you see the way this kind of things are done. Somewhere you can see it is heaving and going back, movement is there, the internal part of the body of the lizard and things like that, and of course the whole movement which is around in that is an extraordinary that he has done. So all throughout I find most people believe that Jangad did this texturing as if it was very beautiful, decorative. It's not so. He was very conscious of what he was doing. So using patterning and textures was a different way of doing it. As I said, he had done stories also, which he compacted, a whole narrative he compacted into a single image. So here there is a image of Fulwari Devi, it's a personification of the river Narmada as a goddess Fulwari Devi. Now, the story that I heard about, is that goddess Narmada was engaged to a person, and maybe a prince, and he was coming to marry her, and she had already sort of dressed up as a bride, and her entire body was smeared with turmeric paste like any bride would have. And then the bridegroom didn't arrive, so she asked her sister to go and see if the bridegroom has arrived. So the sister said, but I have no clothes to wear. So Narmada gave her bridal attire to the sister. When she went and saw the person who was prince or person who was coming to marry her, he thought it is Narmada, so he went, he married her and he took her away. And then Narmada got very angry, and then she began to splash water all around, and all her turmeric paste began to fall on the side, and that is what most Pradhans call Ram Raj, which is a kind of yellow clay, which was actually coming out of the paste that was applied to her body, and the water that she sprinkled fell all around. So there is a whole story, but that story he has compacted into one iconography. So these are things, unless we know, and if we really don't go into the ethnographic background, a lot of this we would miss out. We won't even formal aspect of it, we won't get. In most creation myths of the entire central Indian tribal belt, there is a belief that the earth has 7 or many other continents or divisions or so. So also Pradhans have that thing about the earth being divided into many compartments or continents, or different words are used. Even word like lap is used, that the earth has 7 laps or things like that. So this he has painted here. Now I come to his black and white drawings, which I find are the most excellent, most beautiful, and his understanding of textures and all comes out much more. So both are like birds in union, and so here there are 2 birds, and here extremely beautiful abstraction that I think we are missing out on, because these are very luminous. The way he used line. Those lights, because you can't see anything. So the richness of textures and things. So you can see here even more prominently the point that I'm making, that these textures and patterns are not decorative. They are sort of characterization, but again, very important, that he's not, by doing this, he's not doing anything realistic. It's not realistic. It's still coming out of his imagination and thing. These I wanted to show that how in my computer I can see it very sharp, that some illumination he was able to create, which was like a halo around in many. So that technique which he found when he discovered the magic of the pen, black pen called wrote ring. This is a portrait of a scorpion on this side here, and that of a spider on the right side. But I'm really sorry, because I can see here so sharp. I don't know what's the reason that you can't see, because the whole beauty of this black and white is. But anyway, I'll continue, because we also want to have discussion. Using the same technique, for example, here, how an eagle is swooping down on a snake, and the whole force, the way he has brought about, and the snake confronting the eagle there. So it's not only a question of how he's illustrated it. The question is how he has made these images which are not realistic, but by doing that he has gone beyond realism and has achieved much more expression than it would have been realistic. Then there is this Nazar Bandhani Mukhota, that is in the field often a bull which was dead is half buried to keep the evil eye away and to get better crops. So these also he brought along when he came to Bhopal in his mind, when he was hardly 14 years old when he came here, but all these things were in his mind and he brought them back. Then he was an excellent printmaker, and in that he used to do a lot of experimentation. For example, all these sunbursts that you see here, or the way the graded tones and things like that. So he sort of already deviated from the standard printmaking practices, but while doing that he would experiment when the silk screen is there and he is trying to print. That time also he would do something, and therefore most cases each normally a print you can take many prints from one silk screen, but here I think in his case each print was unique, meaning because he did something with that print. So that shows his tendency towards experimentation. Then he turned towards narrative. Now this I find very interesting, that when, for example, Jangar did not have a narrative tradition, Warlis did not have a narrative tradition, Madhubani did not have a narrative tradition, but when they encounter paper or space or wall or something, they want to tell their stories. And this I have noticed and spent my life working in all this, that somehow the space of the paper, empty space of the paper draws you into it, and it sort of triggers in you an idea that you want to tell your stories. There is something where you get a chance to tell stories. So, and when you tell stories, which is not your tradition, story unfolds in time. So, how do you take care of time when you narrate? I can say that in 19th century this happened, and later I can take, in film, as you see the film, time is taken care of. When you read a novel, time is taken care of in the sense it proceeds. But in visual context, you have to translate that time into space, because that's your medium. So this, here there is a story that Jangar has drawn, and what you see here in the background is some kind of aerial landscape, could be forest, could be fields and thing, and then he is telling a story which is part Pradhan and part Hindu myth involved in that. So the story is that here Shiv and Parvati are shown together. Here Mahadev, they call Mahadev and Parvati are here. Parvati goes for a walk somewhere and she sees that one cow is in copulation with 5 bullocks. Further on she sees many dogs in copulation with one female dog. And so she sort of laughs, scoffs at it. And when this happens, the cow tells her that don't laugh at me. In your next birth, you will be born as Draupadi and you will be married to 5 Pandavas. And then here you see 5 Pandavas and Draupadi. And then there is this eye which is supposed to be floating eye, which is supposed to be a bird, which might be primordial, which has recorded everything or seen everything even before all the creation, and that happened. Now briefly, and then there is a story of Shravan where he took his blind parents to pilgrimage, and Dashrath shoots an arrow thinking that there are some animals, and then Shravan is hit by the arrow, and that story. So these are Pandavani Kathas. So Pandavani singers, they don't sing only Pandav Katha, they also occasionally sing Ram Katha. So now important is that how he has evolved a narrative technique, how to tell the story. He could do it like a comic strip also, but how to tell the story. So he has knowingly dispersed the anecdotes of the story, and you're supposed to look at and connect. And that sort of that narrative is more complex than like a comic strip narrative. So this I think makes an artist, because you have to transform. You have to transform, otherwise, so in a comic strip there is no transformation. Here, the same as he did when he came to Delhi to work for the other Masters exhibition. He did 2 panels depicting the same story or part of the same story. So when there was a kind of narrative turn in his work from single images or just one composite image to then, oh sorry. Yeah. Now here is another example of his narrative devices. Here in this image you see 2 creation myths are combined. one myth is that there was deluge everywhere, water everywhere, and Mahadev thought of doing creation, of making creation. And he took out some dirt from his body, he rubbed some dung and infused life into it. And then he created a crow, and he told the crow to go to the underworld, netherworld, and find some clay from earthworms, because earthworms they eat clay. So he sent, and then he came flying and he saw a crab. So he sat on the claw of a crab, and the crab took him to the underworld where Mahadev's home and was there. The snake was there, and there were clay walls, and then he brings like outside. And here it comes out after that. But there is another myth that he is combined with this composite figure, where there is a myth, we know Hindu myth, that Parvati was taking bath, and Shiva's son was, she told that don't let anybody come in. And then when Shiva came back, he was a vagabond, sometimes remembered he had a wife somewhere. So he just comes and he sees a child who says, I can't let you in. So he chopped his hand, and then Parvati said, he was our son, what should you do? So Shiva said, well, go out and see whichever creature you find first, bring the, I will put, and that's how Ganesh happened. But here it is different, that it is a head which is mounted here on a crab. And the story is that in previous cycle of aeons, the Kali Yuga, the last of the aeons, where it said crabs used to have a kind of snout. So Parvati, when she went out, she found this crab with a snout. So she brought and then put. So that story and the creation story and the crow and the clay that brought is all composed together, and with extraordinary vision of drawing. And then I was telling you when you came here that there is this murals that he has done in Vidhan Bhavan in Bhopal, and those who have not seen, I suggest that if you can go and see, it would be something amazing. These are very large, 15 feet high, or 10, some of them are 20 feet high murals. Some new thing for those who have been in Bharat Bhavan and who have seen this mural, they all talk about this tiger, and then they talk about this airplane. Now I have some new light to shed on this. That is, this tiger and the airplane, they fall out of the rest of the work of Jangad. Now you see this airplane, for example, Jangad's own way of making airplane was more or less like this. Where does this airplane come from? Nobody ever, everybody publishes. And simplest thing to say, all scholars, they say, oh, you know, this is modern influence and Jangad is becoming contemporary and all sorts of things. The thing is that this contemporaneity is coming from outside. There was an artist given to Jangad, was art school trained artist, and he was given to him because the scale of the murals was so high that this art school trained artist was supposed to have helped him with regard to the quantity of paint required, the scale, and this and that. And I found out during my work that actually speaking, he had done the basic drawing of both the airplane, and so it was not Jangad's drawing. So you can see this is a very rare photograph, and if you see this, anyone who has the eye would immediately see that this is not a drawing done by Jangad. It's not Jangad's style. This is a very well-trained art school artist who does a sweep, like that. If I didn't have this photograph, even so, I would have recognized that there is something different. But these are very, very, very rare photographs, and nobody, even in Bharat Bhavan, nobody knows about this. So Jangad did this, somebody did this drawing for him, and then Jangad worked on top of it. So he sort of took it back into his fold. But interesting is that he did not resist, because if you resist, then you are there where your forefathers were, whatever they were doing. Something that new that comes in, if you let it come, and therefore I am quoting this Boris Groys, who is my favorite scholar, and he's written a book called On the New. When does new occur in your work? So just taking an image of airplane or railway train doesn't make it new. How does it happen, and how do you accept or how you deal with it? That's the point when new happens, whether it's in writing, theory, whether anywhere, the new happens. This is extremely wonderful quote from here. Both art and theory derive their effects not from an external value-free principle, meaning not just take an airplane and put in your painting, which many artists are doing, including many Pradhan artists, but from the tension between the different value levels that they embrace, meaning something that comes from outside and something that you are doing. Between these two, if there is a kind of tension, and the greater the tension, the greater the effect. Meaning, how do you collate these two? How do you bring them together? So Jangad had eventually put his own style here, and he did. But even there, you can see the way the shading, etc., is done is still derived from the original. But the wonderful thing about Jangad was that he accepted it. This tension between the two, he didn't reject. He wanted it. And in later works, some of this again comes, and that is he imbibed. So another Groys quote: "The work of art is now no longer integrated and judged on the basis of its conformity to the cultural tradition, but rather with respect to its relationship to its extra-cultural reality." So the extra-cultural reality, what Groys called profane, it's not a dichotomy between religious and profane or secular. Profane is something external, that when that enters your work, so when this rather with respect to the relationship to its extra-cultural, how is that relationship visualized, brought in? How do you deal with it? It happens in every artist's life. So many things happen, and so how do you deal with it? And when you deal with it sensitively or discerningly, new happens. And last part of it is about Jangad's death. There is on the left side, there is a portion of a letter that he wrote home, and one reason why I wrote this book also, not only reason I wrote because of his work, but my personal reason was that in the second letter that he wrote, and that arrived before he had already committed suicide, in the last paragraph he mentioned that he said, because he was so trapped over there, so he mentioned in the letter that my name he mentioned, and he said, ask him if he can liberate me, and if he can write to the director in Japan in the museum to let me go home. But the letter arrived after he had already died. So since I saw this letter much afterwards and I saw my name, I felt kind of guilty that had this letter come, because I knew that the director in Japan, and I could have really, and I was in Government of India, I knew the ambassador in Japan, I could have done something. But it was not to be. So I am just reading, two letters were there, reading this excerpt. They have given me large works to complete. I am trying to finish the work. I am working continuously. We'll try to finish. Let's see till when it can be done. I feel there is some foul play with regard to me. I don't know whether I will be able to see you people again. There is such a feeling. I am writing this in fear. Now these are dots in between, so it's not like that he wrote like this, but there are sentences which I have eliminated for saving time. And from the Japanese side, they prepared a report about his death, because there was a police case, everything. I found it was a report like any government police report would be, but I found a very inadvertently poetic paragraph in that, and it's very touching. the Japanese people, the report that came to me said, at around noon, he went back to his residence for taking meal. This is just hours or minutes before his death. For taking meal, usually he put off the light before coming out of the workroom, but the light was still on. He kept spectacles and cap on the working desk, and as if he could have started painting immediately after coming back to the room, meaning he was still not committing suicide or nothing, or apparently. And kitchen was clean, and sabzi was vegetables. Sabzi was prepared and kept for 2 meals, and the rice cooking pot was clean and kept. The room was kept well, and the floor mat, which is used for sleeping, was kept as sitting purpose. Look at the graphic description a few minutes before he died. Small puja place was kept on the rack, and 27 June facts, which was written in Hindi, was folded and kept in the left side. So there was a niche in which he had created a daily puja place. Under the medicine box, there was a letter that came from India, dated 18 June, but the content was nothing particular about. After the above situation, from the night of 30th June to 14th PM of 3rd July, he lost the balance and connection between the reality and he created his own world, and he cut off the connection with life, wife, children, and friends. He took the path of death. Now this is from the many things Japanese wrote to me from the museum, and I think it is a very poignant paragraph to see how things were in his mind in that moment. After Jangad, I want to just show a few artists. That is what happened after Jangad. When Vidhan Bhavan mural was being created, Jangad had called many people from his village to participate. These were many large murals, and therefore, so many of them came who had never done painting before, but they joined. And partly, Vidhan Bhavan murals were also responsible for several artists from Pradhan community to become artists. So these murals were very important. Now, I haven't taken all artists here to show you, but on top left you can see Anand Shyam's work. Below is Bhajus. On the right side you see Ram Singh, one work. Then on top here you have Narmada Prasad Tekam. Below is Mayank Shyam, and on the right side Nankushya. This I have no time, so I don't explain the story, but that's it. So I had to hurry up, but I still maybe have taken a lot more time, but we will have a discussion with Annapurna now. Thank you very much.
Thank you for a wonderful talk and for refreshing everybody's memory here of who Jangad was, and also revealing what Jangad was elsewhere, because he wasn't just in Bhopal, he was in many different places, including the Pompidou and including in Japan, Delhi.
I happen to be Swaminathan and I were consultants for the Pompidou exhibition, Magician de la Terre, from which I have taken the thing, Conjurer's Archive. In a way, artist is a magician.
So I want to just open it up by a very gentle but I think important question. What makes Jangar's work joyous? From the way you have written this book, what makes his work joyous and sometimes ambiguous, a little mysterious, and sometimes a little dangerous? So if you could talk about specifically the way that he makes images, he conjures them from his imagination. And you began to touch on it with the lizard painting, but I'd like you to explore that a little further.
Yeah, joyous because I think he came to Bhopal when he was hardly 14 years old, and he had left his entire world behind. Of course, he visited his village from time to time, etc. But I think that he had come here filled with memories and legends and things. So when he began to create a whole world of images, Jangar must have left behind at least 250 works, because I have myself seen more than 150 and I know the rest which I didn't have access to. I think in the process of recreating from the memory and from nostalgia a world which was not the world left behind, but the world that he created or recreated. And I think that is what is joyous, because what was left behind, he created, but see, he could have gone back physically to that world anytime. But this world that he created is a world in which he engaged. And engaged on one level at the memory of the thing, the legend, the story, and another level by working and making the work. The joy of doing that. And that, the space between the two is something I think every artist knows is ambiguous, that space, you mentioned ambiguity. That ambiguity, and then I would relate the word ambiguity with kind of abstraction and transformation.
So much of the art of people who come from very specific places. So for example, Madhubani, or in this case, the forests of Middle India. When they're received in urban centers, they're often seen as cute. And the ambiguity and the dangerousness and the immense energy that is poured into that transformation and conjuring is left out. So for example, it's very easy to take up a painting of a tree and say, oh, this is for World Environment Day, or something like that, right? So I'd like you to speak a little bit about the translation that happens, the mistranslation that happened in the process of taking this work and putting it in other settings.
Yeah. We know it well that once a work is completed and it goes from the artist away, it is circulating elsewhere. The artist has no control on it, and therefore, and why should there be control in that sense?
Yeah.
So the image could move on its own, and it can be replicated, it can be, circulated, it can be recontextualized. If that wasn't so, then I can better explain with the analogy of literature. A word has, one word if I utter to you, it can create a storm of associations in your mind. So when we read something, it has so many possible meanings and therefore so many possible uses in a way. So I feel that a work of art, also like literature, it has, if that wasn't so, then we would have literal translation. dictionary meanings or something, literature won't happen. Because of that possibility, it happens. So when a work is taken out of context or put somewhere, now that does its own thing. How it is, what is it, whether it's for commercial purpose, whether it's this or that, that's a separate issue. But I think that there can't be control. It has to move into different spaces.
I would like to, the last question I'll ask, and then I'll open it up to the audience, which is considerable,
Yeah.
thankfully, in this early morning. Thank you all so much. Can you talk a little bit about what makes Jangar's work part of the modern, not necessarily modernist, but part of the modern for you, from your approach and how he would have perceived, since you spent so much time with him, how he perceived his relationship to the modern.
Yeah, this is a question we are dealing with all the time. I've dealt with the word modern tried to deal with when I was working on artists. I felt that modern is a very, if you connect with modernity or modernism, there's a movement in modern. So it relates then to formalism of modern art. I think Jangar wasn't modern in the sense, he was not a modernist artist. He wasn't following his Bharat Bhavan was filled and dominated by modernist and art school trained artists who were constantly sort of making him nervous, what I heard from him, and critical of him and things in many ways. So he was very sad also, and I had very long talks with him. So modern was something else. But I think contemporaneity is, and your work also shows, that contemporaneity is something in which you can move easily, so you're not bound to an ism, but you are open to your environment in which you as artists can take anything and do something else with it. And then slipping into the contemporary, and how much, and Groys's thing again I want to bring, that what he brings out is that how between there is this tension, how much you accept, how much gets imbibed, and how much open you are to your own. Because how could Jangar, for example, or even Mayank, how could he live in that previous time? You obviously live in your time. And how can it be that you are mute to your time? You are just not. It's not possible. And if you do that, then yes, you are dealing with an authenticity. You are just you're searching for a fake authenticity.
In that context, before I open it up to the audience, I just wanted to attach that once Mayank Singh Sham said that he was under tremendous pressure to carry on his father's legacy. But he said, how can I do that? I grew up in Bhopal all my life, and his father was already beginning to be famous by the time he was sentient and aware. So his world could not be the world that Jangar had. And Mayank's work, as I see it evolving, is a kind of infusing a mythology of the present of his world, right? A kind of imaginary of his world. I'd like to open this up to the audience. Do I see any questions? Yeah. So let's start with the woman who is sitting in the front. Your name.
Yeah, I'm Shampa, and so
before Shampa speaks, I must say a lot of research in this book has been done by her in Bhopal, and I'm very thankful. I thanked her in my book. Yes.
I was wondering, because you began your lecture with that Jangar's coming to Bharat Bhavan, and that his muse was. You opened with that. See, I was wondering that would you elaborate on how his growing up, his painting growing up in Bharat Bhavan, in the surrounding of this multi-art complex, how is Bharat Bhavan's presence reflected in his work? How do we get to see this influence of this multi-art complex in his work? Does it translate?
Yeah, both ways. Besides that, he came here and he came across material things like possibilities of color. You know, a very famous quote of his that when I dip my brush in first time in poster color, bright poster color, tremors went through my body. Now that was one physical interaction that he had done, and the possibilities that opened up with color and pigment of bright color and a space of white empty space which tells you do anything. The space is demanding something from you, and to attend to that space. Now that is one aspect of it. But that he was away from his home and he was in an environment of art. So there was a whole art world around him. And that awareness that there is an art world around him, there is an art world, that he entered that world. But he had sense enough, because this was a place where there were people doing abstract and things and all. In a way, he could have jumped into the easy ways of doing abstract or something. But his sensibility enough, that is one, that wasn't he wasn't coming from that, and he realized that has a tradition. But he also came here with a whole mind charged with memories and nostalgia. That was the real world that was left behind. But as I said, that it was in this place that he understood that there are possibilities of image making, and there are endless possibilities of image making, narrativizing and things, and then to begin to work. So if he wasn't here, he wouldn't have done it in a village. But I think being in the art world definitely gave him he opened up the scope for what he could do. But still, that was so much from inside him. Therefore, I would not buy for a second that his language is decorative. But I've seen works of many artists after him that inadvertently or incapaciously turning to decorative, using that language or even elaborating upon that. They're going into beautiful picture making, many of them. Some are doing wonderful things. Baju has done a great painting where this drawing, little color is used, where there are eggs of a bird, and the bird is turned upside down and under the wing, and on top there are clouds. And the clouds have semi-demonic figures. And he said that when the chicks would be born, and they would see the cloud, they would think they are demons and they would be frightened. So the bird has opened, Now that transformation and that thinking is something extraordinary. At the same time, several artists are doing decorative work. They got into the hands of the market. And so a good artist would still have to think about all this. And that also comes out of the art world. And Bharat Bhavan was a place where
I'd like to just add something. Please, I think there's a real dilemma in somebody like J. Swami. No, yeah. J. Swaminathan, Dr. Jain has said this very, very beautifully, that there's a kind of complex space between the modernism of Swaminathan and the sort of position that Jangar came from as being a Pradhan, right? But within that interaction, that tension that Royce also talks about, is a beautiful experience that I think that Bhuribai and even Jangar would have been, is Swaminathan's real interest in supporting their desire to create, their capacity to create. So there was no pressure on them to become a Hussein or a Baba or anybody. It was around them, and here is the paper, here is the paint, here is a space. Bhuribai said, for example, she didn't want to sit inside the dark spaces of Bharat Bhavan being constructed. She sat on the chowpal and started painting, jahan pe dhoop hai, hai na? So this is a very important kind of space, and it's a special space that a place like Bharat Bhavan can give these kind of people. The market cannot give that space, because only take from this kind of space. It cannot make that space. And that's the difference between the generation of artists like Puribai and Jangar who were here, and then the other generations of artists for whom this was not you couldn't come to a space like this with a beginner's mind. You had to come to it that's already completely implicated in the economics of the market, the institutional politics, right? Is that a fair thing to say? So this is a struggle for the new generation. And they have to find that beginner's mind space again.
And also that he need not become a modernist.
Yes.
But what Bharat Bhavan gave was that immense possibilities of expression. And then do what you like
How
with
about
that.
the exposure he got to the world? Because this was a place where a lot of other exhibitions were happening, so he might have been exposed also to a lot of, maybe world tribal art.
But he was too smart, Shampar, to kind of translate it in a one-to-one kind of way. It's so deeply, as he showed with the example of the tiger and the airplane, it's so deeply ingested. Next question. Yes, please. And then the lady who's sitting behind. So first the gentleman, and then the lady who's sitting behind, and then this gentleman, right?
I would like to take up the answers which you have already exposed. The way the Bharat Bhavan was conceived, since I was very much associated with Swamiji.
So you have to say your name.
I am Shailendra Tiwari. I am an artist and engineer, and I have done my exhibitions also here. And I have seen the Jangan working here also. The main problem was that the way the Bharat Bhavan was conceived and the way the tribal art and the tribal ethos were carried by the Swaminathan. Swaminathan, he went to the Mandala, he went to the own places, and then the whole thing, how the Bharat Bhavan was created. When Jangan came in the light of the modern, Swaminathan brought him to the modern world. He brought him from the Gond village, he brought him here so that people can see what is the Gond art, how the Gond art flourishes, the mythology, everything, whatever he carried with him was here. And it was sprouting. It has given a shape, which was otherwise on the walls of the village. It would have come here, and then he started working on it. As soon as it goes to the modern world, so-called, and which is how the other artists are now also going. That's what you pointed out. The sprouting, when something is sprouting, it needs to be given a proper space. It cannot be left open to the market. It cannot be left to the, and then the way he culminated into a society. This itself is the work of research. I don't want to put anything color into it. But my summation is that, are we handling these tribal art in the similar manner Swaminathan conceived it? And is that care is being taken? This should be the, we can
But it need
Thank
not
you.
still go beyond Swami.
Yeah.
Sir, can you please pass the woman who is sitting behind? Please state your name. Thank you so much.
I'm Anjali Narona. I have been working in education for a long time in Eklavya, and we have associations with all the tribal artists, and our initial work with Jangad also. I am very thankful for a very illuminating talk, and I'm really looking forward to the book. And bringing out the aspects of the artist's rooting in his own life, and again the alienation in a certain school of art, that till it is rooted in its own, in their own life, and they don't have a name, then the value is much less. So this deep concern of understanding and how we value, and even today, it pains me a lot of non-tribals, people from our class. They do this style of painting. Instead of promoting and helping these people. The condition of the artists, even today, even after, maybe it's better than what it would have been in villages, maybe not, totally. But they're still living in quite abysmal conditions. So this tension that there is, and how do we, as an educationist, my concern is that this discourse that we have a little bit here, how can we take it out for society to appreciate these aspects? And also a lot of meaning was given when you gave this talk, and I'm sure your book has a lot of it, but otherwise we only see the pictures and we can only appreciate those things aesthetically. But the meaning making, just like language, the author can explicate the meaning they're trying to give. How can, like for each of these paintings, what you explained, how can...
Shall we give him a chance to answer?
Yeah. So, can I just complete my question? How can we do things in a manner in which, with the painting, we have some what the artist meant, so that we can understand, and particularly for children and education, how we can, so the value part and how we can understand their meaning.
I think that even general principle of education besides this would be that a certain openness to given to children to look at things, and all. Why only art? I'm saying in general also. That which we in our school system we have very little. So I feel that there can be lots of possibilities of exposure rather than preaching things. So that it would be a very different way of. It relates to pedagogy and things like that. And I think only because there can't be solutions. But what I'm saying is that the only one word I can use is the tremendous openness of interaction with things and all. That can be the only way that, and to do something, not create biases, which we often mostly do, that we tell rules, we say how things function, what is art, what is non-art, all those things. I think through workshops and things like that, one can, feel automatically things communicate, words communicate, figure, drawings, images, they communicate. So to teach children what images tell them, or things that, and that can be done through workshops of children together, how they interact with or respond to what is in front of them, or something like that. It's a pedagogical question, but anyway, broad answer is more openness and more discursive.
I'd like to actually say something to that question. One is that fortunately there's a tremendous amount of scholarship and art gallery writing that's growing. We have several people here who are working on books for the art forms which don't fall into the more canonical ideas of contemporary art. So there's hope here. That's a hopeful thing I'd like to say. But the second thing I want to say is that let's step back for 1 second. I don't know if Jangar was making art to be a pedagogue. Jangar was making art to be an artist. And art is not, it is taken up for work, for example, ideological work that teaching requires, pedagogy requires. And that's fine. But his primary aim was not to teach with this image. His primary aim was to make art. Now, there are all these people who are taking hobby classes in amateur, in Madhubani painting or in Goan painting. But how many of them actually become professional artists in that language? Very few. And at that moment, I want to come back to the word amateur, which comes from to love. And they're doing it out of a love and a fascination for this kind of art, right? So one way that all of us learn in the world about something is to copy. And we cannot devalue that love that drives you to want to engage with something by copying it. But immediately you also have to say that those things are monetized in a certain way. They're institutionalized in a certain way. There is a regime of intellectual property that is sometimes put on top of this. Each of these has its own constituent parts, dilemmas, ethical questions, which we have to address. And that is what makes art so exciting, especially when it's not that art that sits at the Tate and says, I'm there. In a way, maybe many contemporary artists tend to teach more than somebody like Jangad. Jangad's really every painting seems to me to be approached from a beginner's mind. You know, in that sense that you're exploring something.
Clarify,
What could a pedagogue do? With
let me just clarify. What I meant is that how can we, as adults, as students, understand what the artist had in mind, like you explained. What are the stories? Because we can only, for example, I'm sure Nankusha has a story behind this painting, but it is not communicated. I'm not talking of teaching the art form or other things. So we can only like or not like or look at it in a certain way. But if we could also have the meaning behind it from the artist's mind, we can make our own meaning.
The meaning, I want to say, of course, you tell the story, I tell you the story of this painting, for example. But that's not a question. That also will help. But the thing is, tell me first of all, you put this in front of a child. And wouldn't there a question, what you just, don't forget about the story behind it. Wouldn't somebody ask, why this embrace, for example? Start from there. Then the story will start to unfold. Why a very ferocious animal would be in embrace with this animal, boar. If you start from there and let people guess, maybe they make their own story. And I tell you that mostly children will make really the story, that because the story behind this is the love between a boar and a tiger. And if you tell the children, they will, from the embrace, they will already get into the story without knowing. So I feel like I was showing you that other one, that Pandav Katha and all that. You know, you start putting, first of all, look at it and start wondering what it is. Otherwise, of course, it's very easy. You have the story and you see it as illustration of the story. But artist is not just illustration.
The gentleman here, so, sir, he was waiting. The gentleman in the brown vest.
Thank you. I'm Yamagata from Japan, and I'm an amateur painter. Thank you for. I love painting, and I love watching paintings. Mine is a comment about Mr. Hasegawa, who runs the Michira Museum, where Jangad Singh Sham died. I visited there very shortly and talked with him shortly. I was very much shocked to see the place, which was quite empty to my mind. You know, coming from the village of Patangar near Dindori, where you have the extended family and the village and communication and even auto rickshaw. You come to the Michira Museum in Niigata. It's deep in the mountain, cleared land, no village around. And there is a paved road, but very few cars are running. Yeah. So, but if you visit the website of Hasegawa's, you can find that he's a man of fantasy.
Man of?
Fantasy. Fantasy. And what he believed was good for any painter coming from the primitive situation. You make up an empty space, you have a mountain, you have trees, you have moon, which he adored, he looked around in Japan to find the best moonlight. That's what he says in his website. So there I see a kind of miscommunication. See, like what you told about the authenticity. It's not about authenticity, but it's about some sort of the idea of primitivity, which Hasegawa thought in one way, and Jangar had in other way.
No, I agree. I mean, all the documents, therefore in my book, what I showed here from the Japanese side was only that poetic paragraph, but I have published their position also, first time. Because people are either blaming
Sir,
this or
please,
that.
don't talk in the hall. Thank you so much.
So that I have not done. Whatever they wrote to me, that also I have published. I think there was, as you said, some miscommunication.
Yeah.
And he wanted to go back. There's no doubt that he writes that, more work was given to him, and he didn't know that when would he be allowed to go. Maybe by that time his mental condition had become for some other reason.
Yeah.
Maybe he was suffering. But my point is that even if he had some tension on other account, had he been let go, he would have been able to sort out that tension.
Right.
Which I believe there was perhaps some tension. So I'm not trying to blame or anything. I'm going by the letters, both in Japanese side they have written, Hasegawa and his staff has written 8-10 letters to me. I have about 15 pages of text from them. So, and I'm no interest. Hasegawa, I liked him very much. He had contributed immensely towards my previous book on Ganga Devi, the Madhubani artist, and I think he was doing wonderful thing. But as you said, miscommunication happened. Circumstances were, we don't know what the circumstances were in the artist's mind, why he was driven to this. But one thing is definite, that had they let him go a little early.
Right.
But it's not that because, only because he wasn't allowed to go, or not, his visa problem arose, they were holding. And he writes very clearly that I was given large number of works to finish. And one sentence also is half readable. It says they have also put an exhibition on me. So he thought he won't be able to go. But that's not the only reason. To me it sounds that he had developed some tension on account of some reason. And that he could have perhaps sorted out after going, but he couldn't, and therefore something late. So maybe it is from both sides.
Right. Well, I'm not defending Hasegawa,
No, no,
but what I want to share here is that, like your authenticity, if you hope that a tribal artist should behave in this way or that way, to be primitive or to be naked, or that's the real cause of many problems, and we should avoid it. Thank you.
So there are last two questions. So, there.
I'm Ramesh. I've been into media a lot actually. Last 30 years I've been to television and other things. See, what I find, Dr. Jain, is that how your ecosystem is handling these kind of tragedies. Actually, there is always a conflict between actual natural artist and a so-called institutional artist. Actually, and it is coming again and again. Now, if you see this example here also, the lack of respect. Actually, we don't allow the ecosystem, the players in the ecosystem to survive. Person like you, Amit, what is our advice for the budding artist? How are you going to propose to handle these kind of situations? Because we are losing very good, genuine artists because of that. Space of natural artists has been killed. That's what you see. Go to any of the one of the best institutes you go, you will find that actually, where art is being displayed. That's my question.
Yeah, I mean, we can't be, first of all, we can't be protective, really. I mean, artist has to go and do where something like unfortunately happened. But I don't think that that we should create some protective systems or things like that. Then we will start protecting aesthetic also. So sometimes we say, oh, it is not even indigenous, it's not even Indian, it doesn't come from his tradition or that tradition. So I think protection by itself is a very limiting thing. Things can happen, but I think total freedom for an artist to go and do and learn and imbibe and think, that I think is very mindful. So I don't think things like ecosystem or things that are very restrictive things, so I think artists must do what one wants to do.
Sometimes it's dangerous. And sometimes it's dangerous.
It's dangerous, and art is very dangerous. It's a very live wire, and when you don't deal with it, you are a bad artist.
The question here, and then the last question back there, and then the question.
I'm Katie Lazarovich. Thank you so much. My question is about terms, and part of the issue, terms. So indigenous, tribal, folk, vernacular. So, like James Clifford points out that, anthropology, art history, curatorial, they use the same terms, but they're not in conversation. So I'd like you to speak a bit on maybe the genealogy of these terms within the marketplace and then in scholarship, if you can say anything at all. I'm sure you can say a lot, but anything you can say here.
Actually,
She's asking something if you'd like to just explore in conversation, terms like tribal, vernacular,
terminology.
Yeah. And how they've changed over time.
Yes. I mean, partly I've dealt with it already. You saw dressing, clothing, code, that. Also, look, I'm telling you that why is it gone on? I don't know if there are artists sitting here. They know very well that it was totally out of ignorance that the term gone was quoted. Because maybe that time there was no anthropologist in Bhagavan, there was no scholar of that kind who would, and also, so actually speaking, they do not belong to the God community. They belong to, and you go through census of India right from colonial time, post-independence, all throughout, and that's how Jangar's name came, that he was actually named Jangar, which means, because he was born on the day when census authorities had come to his village, and they were doing census of the Pradhan community and the Gonds who lived also in Pradhan, in Patangarh. So he was a Pradhan, and the relationship between Pradhan and Gond, first of all, they don't intermarry among them. How is it that they are gone? So when you're talking of market, what has happened is that the misnomer that got circulation, now the market will never allow them to say it's a Pradhan painter. But they have a very peculiar relationship, and not being able to marry together. Then traditionally there was a custom of Pradhans going as singers, because Pradhans are the poets, they are the singers, they are the artists, and they were working for the Gonds, narrating to them the Gond legends and the Gondwana stories and things like that. So this was the kind of relationship they had. So when Jangar was born, this the word is Janganana, meaning census. So when he was born, these people who were there, they said, oh, why don't you name the child Janagana? Because we have the Janagana means counting of people, census. So name the child Jangana. So then I asked Jangar why it became Jangar from Jangana. So he said Jangana was a very Sanskritic formulation, and our national anthem in India as opening is Janagana Mana. So and Swaminathan often used to call Jangar when he saw going Janagana Mana, he used to call it. So the heart of the people, so to say. But what happened was that he said Jangar to me that my people were not educated and therefore they could not say Jangana, so they made it Jangar. So he was from Sanskrit, he was vernacularized. And in my book I have said that after that he
always remain a vernacular artist. You know, very this division, you know, market. You try and sell it as same art as Pradhan it won't. And I've spoken to all artists here. Internally they say that yes, we are Pradhans. And if Gonds and Pradhans are the same, they say they are younger brothers of Gonds. If it is so, why there is no intermarriage or thing? They are, you know, exogamous community, you know. And then the whole thing so, but it was a mistake for the sake of the market. We'll have to carry it on.
I just want to say something. That, you know, artists use different words at different moments. And so they might use tribal in one context, especially when communicating to curators from America who do not know things like Pradhan or Gond, but they're interested in Indian vernacular, because that's a new category that's gradually emerging as an international contemporary from India, right? Sometimes they use the word Adivasi because the government uses the word Adivasi, right? So
yes, but tribal is also recognized government word. So you know we have scheduled tribe. And what is scheduled tribe? In the Constitution of India there are two schedules. Scheduled caste and scheduled tribes. So the tribes are, you know, again they are scheduled, you know. So the word is accepted, you know, and therefore there is a problem of vernacular can have one kind of problem, tribal can be another kind of problem. So you know,
Adivasis.
the only way we can deal with it is describe, you know, say what are the problems with that term, but in the absence of or unavailability of the term, we are using it, and then it becomes quite clear.
I would like to end this conversation here and thank Dr. Jain
Thank you very
and the
much.
Bhopal Literary Festival for
Thank you
inviting
so
us
much.
and
Thank you for watching the session from BLF 2019. Kindly subscribe to our channel for more such videos.